my own direction. No one can pull me out. I've always felt different from the others. I'm running away now. Fears are fading, won't stop bleeding. 'Cause I'm sick of standing up instead of going down. I'm sick of never being able to cross the line. I'm sick of pretending everything is fine. You got it, you're just a fucking freak like me.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of Ring Respect Radio. I am Bobby Munson, and the man beside me, you know him, the man with the angelic voice, Papa Smokes. And our special guest at this time, the man below right there, that is Mr. Rich Bocchini. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to join us right here on Ring Respect Radio.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we've been very much looking forward to the opportunity to talk to you. We're obviously big fans of MLW, so we've seen a lot of your work over there, but definitely wanted to have an interview and be able to talk to you about your career in broadcasting, something that we do on the independent side. We right here in Canada, we have a promotion, Prairie Pro Wrestling. Bob Smokes and I have been on the commentary side, and we want to be able to sit down with somebody who's in that line of work and be able to just find out a little bit more about you and about the business as well too. And so just kind of want to start it off. What got you into broadcasting or doing play-by-play commentary?
Oh, man, I think the first thing that kind of drew me to broadcasting was music, actually. College radio, of all things. And I grew up in the Boston, Providence, Rhode Island, but greater Boston area. And, in the 90s, college radio was a big deal, right, 80s and 90s. And we had tons of great college radio stations. And if you were into music like I am, I'm a huge audiophile. That was the place at the time where you were able to find independent music as opposed to stuff that was on MTV. So I was like, oh, gee, when I go to college, I'm going to do college radio. So I did, and quickly realized that, being a DJ or whatever was not what I wanted to do. I also played hockey growing up. I played goalie for my high school hockey team and loved the game and wanted to find a way to kind of be around the game. And I was I was on a lunch break at work one night, and I went out to my car, and I put on the Providence Bruins game, and it kind of dawned on me. I was like, wait a minute. There's an American Hockey League team, like, right down the street. And I loved the Bruins growing up. I loved listening to Fred Cusick and Derek Sanderson, who did the Bruins games on Channel 38. And I was like, geez, maybe I can become a play-by-play guy. It was just kind of like on a whim, like, maybe I can do this. And I started driving to games with a tape deck and calling games and figuring out how to do it and driving back from the games and cringing, listening to myself. And over time, kind of figured out what I was doing. And one thing led to another. I did hockey for a long time. And just through kind of happenstance and dumb luck, I kind of stumbled forward into doing wrestling. So it's been it's been an adventure. It's been a trip. It's not one that I necessarily that I advise a lot of people. I get a lot of, hey, do you have any advice for getting into broadcasting? Yeah, don't. Get an accounting degree. Like, broadcast on the side or something. You know what I mean? Like, do something where you're not going to be, either, it's feast or famine in broadcasting. Like, you're either at the top making good money or you're struggling and trying to find a way to make it all work. So, been a lot of places, done a lot of cool things. I've had a lot of fun. But it's definitely, it's not for everybody, and that's probably the biggest thing that I try to get across when people ask me that. Like, just know what you're getting into, because it's not easy.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of pro wrestling, did you grow up a pro wrestling fan, or was this an opportunity that came along from your time working within play-by-play for hockey games?
Big wrestling fan growing up. We had WWF shows every month in Providence and Boston. I got to those as much as I could. Excuse me. I really gravitated towards Crockett. 85, 88 Crockett Promotions. It's funny you ask about broadcast. Another moment that I had in broadcasting, I was maybe 9 or 10, and I remember hearing Tony Schiavone calling wrestling on TBS, and that kind of clicked as well. I was like, that's actually something people get to do. How do you do that? But, always thinking, well, that's just too far. I'll never be able to get to do that, right? But no, I devoured as much wrestling as I could as a kid. AWA, NWA, WWF, World Class, whatever wrestling was on, crappy local wrestling that was on TV, like some of the really bad indie stuff that would come on sometimes. I mean, I watched all of it. Probably the biggest the biggest thrill for me as a kid, as a wrestling fan, in 1987, Crockett ran Boston Garden. I'll never forget hearing Tony Schiavone on a Saturday night saying, it was I think it was April 4th. I think it was Saturday night, April 4th, Boston, Massachusetts, Boston Garden. Running around the house. Oh my God, Dad, 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 Dad. And so he took me, and we went again in '88 when they came back, and that was awesome.
Yeah, must be a great time. I do have one question that was posed from one of our close friends here too, and knowing that you have a background working with both NXT and MLW, wanted to quickly find out from you, what is a day working within the NXT ranks, doing commentary for them like versus MLW? What's a typical commentary day for either show like for you?
And on a TV day, they're not really all that different. The day-to-day, the non-TV days are. That's a completely different thing. But if you're asking specifically about a TV day, there are differences. MLW, a lot of times we would do production meetings ahead of time, a couple days ahead of time. So when we get there, we're not spending 2 hours in a conference room going over stuff that could have been taken care of. We obviously do an MLW. The budget is not as big as NXT. The staff is not as big, so it's a lot of hands doing a lot of different things. So it's easier in that regard to kind of do some of that stuff ahead of time. Usually NXT, a TV day would be, there'd be a production meeting. And then, you're going all day. You're ringside during the day. And the same thing with doing SmackDown or doing main event or whatever, production meeting at, noon or 1 o'clock or whatever. And then you're there. You're at the building until, midnight probably, 11 o'clock, midnight by the time you get out of there. There's a production meeting. You kind of get your notes. You get, your initial rundown of what's going to happen, which, in WWE's case, changes about probably 8 times before you actually go out to the desk. MLW stuff's a little more dialed in because, we would tape a couple weeks at a time, so things need to be a little more pinned down. NXT, with the way that's produced, or anyway, the way it was produced when I was there, you had time to go back and fix stuff. And you do with MLW. There's post-production as well, but, probably the biggest, the biggest thing is that just with MLW, you're kind of a little more dialed into stories. Stuff doesn't change as much on the fly as it would with WWE.
Fair enough. Papa Smokes, I know you're itching to get some questions. So turn down. Where do you,
hey,
my brother?
Real quick, where are you guys in Canada?
Saskatchewan. Actually, out of
Saskatoon or what?
Saskatoon, you bet. Yeah.
You've
heard of it.
The first hockey coach the first pro coach that I had was Terry Ruskowski, and he was the coach in Knoxville. He hired me in Knoxville to work there, and I know he worked for the Blades for a while. He was the head coach of the Blades in like '89 or something like that. So
back when the Blades were still doing really well for themselves.
Yeah. Are they not doing well anymore?
They're okay at times. I mean, they're hot and cold. They'll go on a bit of a streak and get us all excited, and then all of a sudden it just flattens right out. It's unfortunate, of course, but yeah. I mean, I was originally born in Calgary and then moved to Saskatchewan here in Saskatoon area, and Papa Smokes, they're a Winnipeg guy.
Winnipeg. I got to call a game at the old arena before they tore it down.
Oh, nice.
It was the Manitoba Moose.
For sure.
And, called a couple playoff games there, and enjoyed my time in Winnipeg. I will say this: everybody says Winnipeg is the coldest place on earth. I would counter that with that same trip we had to go to Milwaukee as well, and for some reason I remember Milwaukee being colder than Winnipeg.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know why.
That's a tough one to beat because Winnipeg is pretty cold for sure. So.
Well, I watched a lot of classic AWA in the old Winnipeg arena too, as a teenager, and that was some really good times because all the greats came through there at some point. Not all of them, but I saw everybody from Ric Flair and the Road Warriors to Bockwinkel and Heenan and all those guys. That was a great time.
Right.
But I was going to ask you, you were talking about some of your early wrestling watching influences and such, and I wanted to ask you what kind of commentary or commentators struck your interest at that time, because you would have been hearing some good ones from WWF, NWA, and AWA also. Anyone stick in your mind from that period?
Yeah, Schiavone was... It's funny because I get to work with him at MLW, but, Schiavone really was a big influence on me. in a lot of different ways. I loved his delivery, how smooth he was, and getting to work with him, 20 years after the fact was kind of coming full circle. Kind of like when getting to work with Dusty at NXT was just crazy. But Tony's a baseball guy, right? So he's kind of got that baseball delivery about him. He's got that smooth, kind of calm, So
slower kind of hit.
Yeah. It's I think I picked that up from him. But I loved listening to all the different announcers for different reasons. Vince and Jesse had their thing. Gorilla and Bobby was like everybody talks about Gorilla and Bobby, right? I enjoyed Rod Trongard. His style. He had that old school radio kind of deep golden pipe sort of voice. He had that old school style about him. I liked listening to him.
He was a little confused sometimes too.
Was.
Like, that's what I found funny too. He made mistakes, and
he's more of a kind of like Bill Mercer, who I liked certain things about his style as well down at World Class. They're sports guys, and they treated it like sports. And that's what I think. Technically, you go back and you listen to them now, and you can probably pick apart a million different mistakes and stuff they didn't know or whatever. But I think it was just the way they approached it is probably what rubbed off on me more. You could tell that they were sports guys. They weren't constantly shilling, constantly salesmen. There was just a little bit of a different approach from, say, like a Vince, who was constantly over the top and, really big on the larger-than-life characters and, treating it more as entertainment as opposed to calling it like a sport. But even Vince back in the day was kind of a traditional play-by-play guy, in a sense, before they really, dove into the, kind of the Jerry Springer sort of, wild show business stuff, if you will.
Yeah, Vince just never learned the names of any of the maneuvers. Hey,
Right.
That's where that "what a maneuver" came
Sure.
from. He said that for everything because he didn't know the names of most of them.
No, that's I've had that conversation with people too over the years where, in the indies now there's such a focus on naming moves all the time, and if you listen to some play-by-play guys, all they do is name moves, and there's no context, there's no storytelling. I always say moves don't matter, and people, what are you talking about? Moves don't matter. Well, to me, moves only matter when they matter. A finish, a big move. If you call it a suplex, does it matter if it's a Saito suplex or what? I mean, maybe kind of in a way, but in the what's happening in the match, what is the move doing? Why is the move important? To me, is more important than, being 100% accurate and saying it's a particular type of armbar or what. You can get that stuff in. Your color guy can get that in. There's a way to work that in. But if you're just naming off rapid fire moves, you might as well be calling a skateboarding competition. Like, you need to tell the story as what's happening, why it matters, and what it means in context of the match, in my opinion.
Yeah. And that's honestly been one of the big draws for both of us with MLW is not only do we like the sports presentation, but again, yourself and especially Dombrowski in the last little while have done an excellent job. Like when they're bringing in talent from all over the world and we're not necessarily familiar because we haven't seeked them out, telling that story, letting us know who this is, why we should care about particular wrestler coming down to the ring, what their accolades are and what they bring to the table. And that's drawn us in. And that's, kudos to both yourself and Dombrowski for doing that. You've worked with some amazing people. And another one, what's it been like? I got to ask the question. What was it like sitting beside and working with who's probably the most controversial guy when it comes to
I know where you're going.
Modern wrestling, but you worked with Mr. Jim Cornette.
Yep.
We're honestly guys that listen to him. We've enjoyed his play-by-play as well, too. What was it like getting the opportunity to work with Jim?
Awesome. I consider Jim a friend. We haven't talked in a while, but, Jim and I, we agree on probably 99% of the way we approach things. He's an old school guy. He's controversial. He said something to me once. He said, nobody will ever know where, is it James Michael Cornette? Is that his name? Whatever his real name is.
Yeah.
Right? Basically, nobody will ever know where James Cornette, the person, and James E. Cornette, the wrestling person, nobody will ever know where that separation is, right? So, does he believe everything that he says 100%? I think he does. Does he embellish? Yeah. And it makes for great listening, He riles people up, and that's that's what he did as a manager. It's what he does now on a podcast. But I thought that was really interesting and a really interesting way to kind of look at it. Nobody will ever know where the guy ends and the character begins, and vice versa. Jim was great to me. Learned a lot from Jim. Treated me really, really well. We had some great conversations. After some of the tapings, we'd go to Denny's. Me, him, a couple of the guys. We'd get in Black Beauty and go to Denny's and sit there and post wrestling IHOP or Denny's with Cornette. It was really cool. He's another guy that when I was a kid saw him on TV. And the funny thing is, I hate medical procedures. I get really antsy going in for medical stuff. And the thing and I told Jim this, I said, you're the reason I take Xanax, Jim. And he said, what are you talking about? When he busted his knee off the scaffold, he did an interview when he came back, and he explained going, when I fell off that scaffold, whatever. And when they're wheeling you into the ER and they put that mask over in your face and you count down from 10 and you don't know if you're ever going to wake up again. Now, at 9 or 10 years old, I had had my tonsils out not long after that. And I never even, I was like, I'm not excited about going to do this, but I never thought about the fact that, they're going to knock me out and, you really don't know if you're going to wake up or not, right? You probably will. So because of that, I told him that he created my fear of doctors and medical procedures, and I'll never forgive him for that. So
That's
I was
too
like,
funny of a story.
because of you, every time I go to get a blood test, Jim, I have to take a Xanax. Thank you.
Yeah. And see, we have similar stories with when it comes to the tonsil thing, because it was around the same age for me too. And of course, the POS old man that I had at the time starts telling me stories about what they do when you have no control and you're asleep. They're going to stick a big ass fork down your throat. They're just going to twist away, start shredding things. Yeah, to hell with you, old man. But
Right.
yeah. Pops, folks, what do you got next for us?
Well, I was just thinking about commentary again. You've done the sports commentary, in particular hockey and a few other things. And I found when Bobby and I started doing commentary roughly 6 years ago, I tried to go at it from a sports-based perspective. There's a Canadian football announcer named Bob Irving that I'm a great admirer of, and I always try to bring a little bit of Bob's knowledge and energy into wrestling commentary. I was wondering what kinds of similarities you saw between the two, and did hockey broadcasting help your wrestling commentary?
A little bit. In the fact that when you call a goal and you're calling a sequence of a goal, and especially for radio, it's a little different on TV, but especially for radio, you kind of when I first started out, there was a guy named Bob Crocker who back in the day he was the GM of the Whalers, and I'd see him at games in Worcester, Mass. all the time. We'd talk, and kind of pick his brains. He'd been around the game for a long time, and he's like, you almost kind of need to be a thespian when you're doing this, especially on the radio. So to me, most good radio guys that are calling hockey, there's a flow and there's a cadence and a rhythm, and you're gonna build to a goal, right? So Bruins take the puck, send it in, Bort gets it, fires ahead. Here's Neely cutting in, fires across, Adamos to the net, fires on, shots, go, right? So you're doing that.
Yeah.
That I hear some radio guys that are just flat, and then they call a goal and they're screaming and yelling. I don't want to rag on anybody publicly, but there's a couple of guys that are like that. Which if that's their style, that's their style. To me, I prefer more of a up and down wavy thing. So, to kind of answer your question, when you're calling high spots or you're calling a good sequence in a match, when you're building to a finish, to me, you want to reflect that in the tone of your voice, and it doesn't always have to be yelling and screaming. A lot of guys think that to get excited you have to scream. You don't. But you can, the inflection in your voice, to me, is the key part of that. So I think I took that from hockey into wrestling. The biggest thing that I had to really, really, really wrap my head around, that I think most people that start doing wrestling play-by-play, is the storytelling. Because when you're doing hockey, you don't have time to tell stories, really. You're calling the play. You're focusing on where the puck is, and that kind of thing. You may have time to get in a tidbit about where a guy was drafted, or before the puck is dropped, a stat about the goalie or something like that. But you don't really have time to tell a story. You do that stuff in the pregame. You do it in the intermission. In wrestling, if you're just calling moves the entire time, you're not telling the viewer anything. They can see the moves. You don't need to say everything that's happening. So Kind of the formula for calling a match. You get your entrances, you talk about each guy a little bit, but you're setting up, why is this important? Why, if I'm watching this at home and I just turn this on, why do I give it, why do I care? Why should the viewer care? So set up the stakes of the match. You get into the match, you've talked about each guy a little bit, you're explaining why it's important. This guy said this, if you remember, this happened before and this caused this rivalry to explode and blah, 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 blah. As you get into the match and now you're into the meat of the match, now you're kind of getting into the high spots and you're focusing more on what's happening in the match. Well, he's really been working the leg the entire match. Joe Blow's, knee has to be killing him. Look at him, he's hobbling around, right? So now you're focusing on that. How is he going to battle through that? The other guy keeps focusing on it. And then you build to the finish, and then once the match is over, you're putting over, again, why was the match important? What just happened, and what does it mean going forward? So you're kind of baking in, and I don't know that I've ever even verbalized this before, but if you liken it to hockey, like you're almost kind of taking your pregame and your postgame, and then the game itself, and you're melding that into like an 8-minute match. You know what I mean? So you're doing your pregame and your postgame as part of the match, and then you're calling the action as well. So there are definitely similarities. I think like guys that maybe do baseball might have an easier time coming into wrestling and learning how to just slow down and not call everything a million miles an hour and just tell the story of what's going on. Because if you listen to baseball, that's what Vin Scully. I cried when Vin Scully passed away. You know what I mean? I loved listening to Vin. He's one of the greatest storytellers in the history of baseball, and I've tried to take some of that and build that into my wrestling call. So it's been a process for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, Bob Smokes. Any other questions you got there?
Oh yeah, I do have some. What about announcing styles between different sizes of companies? Like we were saying, Munson and I work for a small company in a small city. But it looks like that the style and the whole intensity of the thing has to ramp up for a different size company. And you've worked on the indies and for some of the major companies. What are some differences between the two styles?
WWE is a very specific way that they want you to do things. It's more storytelling than it is anything else. When you're doing the indies, a lot of times they're just cold matches, so there's no stories. So you almost have to kind of make stuff up. Talk to guys ahead of time and kind of find something to embellish and talk about. Probably the biggest thing from company to company, on the indies, you definitely have a lot more freedom to kind of do, I don't want to say do what you want, but to kind of approach it in a way that's more natural for you. But that said, a lot of people rag on the way WWE does their commentary or their play-by-play, and there's certainly things that, to rag about. I think that just what I've read lately, I guess it's loosened up a little bit, and they're actually able to say wrestling and belt and talk about moves and talk right. Imagine that, right? Like talk about history and stuff. But it's MLW for example. We'll have story notes that that we go over ahead of time, and I guess it's the same thing with other companies as well. Like if you have a working relationship with another company, maybe you're going to talk about them a little bit. And if you don't, why are you going to put them over? You know what I mean? And it all depends. A world like MLW is more of a closed world where things kind of happen within that world, as opposed to doing an indie like I do DEFY. We talk about everything. There's certain companies that we don't if there's if there are issues or certain reasons why we would. But generally speaking, everything's fair game when you're doing the indies. You're going to talk about where a guy's been. He flew in from whatever. He's in the Battle of Los Angeles last night for PWG. Had a big match. Some other companies are not going to acknowledge that, so it's just kind of knowing what the promoter wants and kind of what what the route is there.
So did you take any formal training when it comes to your broadcasting? Did you take any schooling for it, or was this something you got into, happened to get into it, and learned along the way? Just got experience through working with other people in the industry.
Yeah, pretty much that. I got a degree in communications. I did PR. When you work at minor league hockey, minor league sports, if you're the play-by-play guy, you're also the PR guy. You're running the website. You're probably selling tickets. You're doing a million different things. I really focused on the PR communications website stuff, and the play-by-play was, kind of more the fun stuff. That was what I looked forward to doing, as opposed to the the day-to-day office grind of just running the business. So as far as like I've had the opportunity to pick the brains of a lot of people that I respect, but a lot of it's just trial and error. That's there's a certain sect of I think broadcasters that they all go to Syracuse and they all kind of sound the same. They kind of sound like Sean McDonough, who's excellent, but there's a certain style when you can hear if oh yeah, he went to Syracuse. Of course he did. He sounds like a Syracuse guy. There are other people like myself that kind of do it, and we've kind of learned, like I said, trial and error, kind of by osmosis, just listening and working on it, and calling a game or calling a match in a way that I want to hear it. And that's something else. You got to get used to hearing your own voice. But when I call a match, I envision myself listening to, well, how would I want to hear this called? How would I want to hear the announcer get excited? So I try to go about it with that mindset.
That's awesome. Papa Smoke's going to turn it over to you. Any last questions? We don't want to keep our guests too late here.
Sure. I did have one thing that I was wondering about. I read about your work in Texas with Booker T and Texas NWA, and you've worked a couple other companies that look like they concentrate on classic style wrestling, 80s or 70s style wrestling. How do you reconcile it when you have to call a match or some spots for a current company and you're not too crazy about the spots in the way that they fit into wrestling? I'm trying to word this judiciously here. Those weren't the words I was thinking of when I came up with this question, but we haven't had to do this too much in our company. In fact, very rarely at all. But I've always wondered how you would deal with a spot that you just personally don't like, but you don't want to show the company that you don't like it either.
Well, yeah, I mean that's important. You get you're getting paid to do a job and to put over what the product is. So there's a couple, I guess, facets to that answer for me. Number one, I'm kind of selective about the stuff I do. I try to stay away from, if we're gonna use a Cornette as a mud show shit,
Mm-hmm.
There's a company in Florida that I do. I live in Gainesville. There's a company here called Fest Wrestling, which is just wild, crazy party wrestling. A friend of mine runs it. I live here. There's a music festival that's involved with it. I'm not 100% on board with some of the style of the matches, but that's the one kind of guilty, crazy, nonsensical wrestling show that that I allow myself to do and just kind of have fun with it. So I think that's key in some ways. Just have. I mean, we're not curing cancer here. We're calling wrestling, right? So,
Yeah.
But that said, there are times when I've called a match and I got to put something over, or if something's just, really dumb, I'll let my color guy take care of it. Or you just kind of, another way to approach that is, you try to make the play-by-play guy, the straight man, so to speak, as opposed to the color guy. The straight man's job is to kind of make sense of the nonsensical, right? And sometimes that's as easy as just being completely flummoxed by what the hell's going on. Oh my God, this is crazy, right? Now, that said, after the match, once we hit stop, do I turn to my color guy and bury what the fuck just happened? That happens from time to time. There have been a couple hey, what'd you think of the match? I'm like, yeah, it was great. No. We want to know, what did you think? And I've gone into discussions about, okay, well, you did this, which completely didn't make sense in the context of why would you do that? Different styles, different, so that's kind of the way I handle it. I try to put over, I try to be as positive as I can with stuff. Luckily, I haven't called too much that I look at and I'm like, that was just dumb. That was just stupid. I haven't had a ton of that. But certainly, if somebody blows a spot in a match, you try to cover it. You try to make sense of it. An example of that would be everybody's using doors now, right? Because you can't buy wooden tables, so everybody's going through doors, right? Why would there be a door under the ring? So Cornette actually kind of led me here. When it looks like a door, it's a door. How do you get around? But if it's wood, if it's just regular wood, oh, it's a ring board. It's an extra ring board. just to
Yeah.
right. So there are ways that you can keep up or try to keep up the suspension of disbelief, but there are times where it's just, it depends on the promoter. There's some promotions that are just like, yeah, it's all fake. Who cares? It's all dumb. We're just gonna do whatever we want.
Yeah.
That's not my style. That's not the wrestling that I like. If you're winking, nodding at everybody, what's the point of being invested in it? That's my take on it. But some people like that car crash stuff, and for the people that like that kind of thing, that's the kind of thing those people like.
Never gonna fix that anyway. So, but no, we really appreciate you taking the time here to talk to us. This is a wealth of knowledge. Learned so much here today. Before we end the show here, though, just want to give you an opportunity to let people know what you got going on, what you got coming up, and plug your social media as well too.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Rich Bocchini, RichBoccini. I'm also on Instagram, just at Rich Bocchini, I think is the name. I don't post a ton of wrestling stuff on there. I'm more wrestling centric on Twitter, but a lot of travel stuff. Pictures from airplane windows is what I like to put up on Instagram. We've got this weekend, the 17th of December. I'm going to be in Seattle for DEFY. That's I don't know if you had a chance to see DEFY, but they take more of a classic style mixed with modern. The look of the building is incredible in Washington Hall. The crowd, super, super loud. It's probably one of my favorite promotions to do. So I'll be there for that. DEFY on Demand, we'll have the show up a couple days after that. I'm also going to be doing Deadlock Pro Wrestling. They're out of the Carolinas. I've got a show coming up for them. Warrior Wrestling in Chicago. I think I'm going to be in South Bend in January. And what else do I have coming up? Those are the three that I can think of right now. It all kind of sometimes blends together.
Oh, perfect. Well, hopefully everybody checks out your work. Checks out this as well too. If you're watching on any of our channels, make sure to like, subscribe. Also, go follow Rich Bocchini and check out everything that he's got going on. And we just want to say a big massive thank you for taking the time out of your day to join the two of us and just chit chat about the kind of wrestling we like and be able to pick your brain about commentary as well. It's been an absolute pleasure, Rich. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Guys, I really appreciate you having me, and let's do it again. We don't have a whole ton of time here tonight, but we could probably talk about stuff for hours. So feel free. Let's get together again and
Sure.
Let's do it again.
Fantastic.
That'd be great.
Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.